Whether you're conquering professional exams or personal milestones, we welcome you to Beyond Clean's Confidence Certification, the 52-week test prep podcast series. With expert insights, actionable tips, and engaging discussions, we'll break down the toughest concepts in sterile processing and build your confidence every step of the way. Join host Sarah B. Cruz as she embarks on a mission to help you not just prep for tests, but craft your success story. And now your host, Sarah B. Cruz.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Confidence Certification, a 52-week test prep podcast series to equip you to take your sterile processing career to the next level. I'm your host, Sarah B. Cruz, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about where does certification fit in. Hello, welcome back, everybody. And I just want to thank you all for joining us in the second episode. Hopefully my first episode didn't scare you off when I was talking about the 4 times it took me to get certified in sterile processing. Because remember, the whole point of that was to demonstrate that we're allowed to evolve, we're allowed to grow, and frankly, we're allowed to mess up. We're just people, and it's all about how we get back at it, or how people like to say in sterile processing, you just got to keep at it. So hopefully this podcast will help you gain real tangible ways to, quote, get back at it when frankly you just want to give up. So as we move past that episode and figuring out that we want to be certified, let's figure out how to literally fit in the whole certification process into our daily lives, maybe our competing priorities, and then even like when we think about it mentally and spiritually, dare I say, like where does certification resonate with you in your goals on where you want to go? And we actually have a special feature for today. So I'm going to be bringing in my work BFF, dare I say, you know, the one that will always go to decon with you, even though they probably don't like the style of music that you're going to play back there. You know, the one that'll go up to the OR with you to have that tough conversation with the doctor because you don't have a set ready for them. I'm really excited to actually have my work BFF, Bobby Parker, on the show. Hey, Bobby.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be talking about confidence certification. I've been doing sterile processing for about 12 years now and have walked alongside a lot of technicians through this process. And so, yeah, excited to be talking about this with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because it's important to have these different views on certification. You know, just because my experience is the one that I live doesn't mean it defines everybody in the entire industry, right? It doesn't matter how small the industry is. Everybody has different lived experiences. And I know your experience was a little different. So why don't you take us through those years? Take us all the way back.
That's right. Well, like just about all of us, I found sterile processing by accident. I don't know if any of us ever entered this field on purpose. Maybe you did. I don't know.
No, man. Sterile processing finds you in the weirdest ways, right?
That's right. That's right. So I got into sterile processing because I had just gotten married, needed some health insurance, wanted to work in a hospital because I naively thought that was the cheapest way to get health insurance. And then the description of sterile processing sounded terrifying. It reminded me of like maybe the dish room in the back of the Cracker Barrel I'd been working at the time. But when I got into it, I really came to love it. But when I got started, I remember asking my preceptor the question, like, hold on, wait a second. What is an OR? You keep saying that. So, super base level. But what I remember about that, I was very motivated to take care of my family, very motivated to do a good job at my work. And they had this certification that if you would take it, they would offer you a 5% increase. And that was a big deal to me back then. And so I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that from hire to certification, I maybe set the technician record at the time for that department because I was going to hurry up and get that raise. And so that was kind of the beginning of my sterile processing story, is just wanting to take care of my family, ended up growing to fall in love with it, but really motivated to get that certification as quick as I could.
I like how you mentioned insurance in your story because that was also in my story. I didn't really even have a concept of how expensive it was. Oh, to be young. I just knew I needed it because I was going to be off of my parents' health insurance. I was like, well, time to get a big girl job, dare I say, right? So I related to the whole insurance aspect of that. But you also touched on something where you had said that you weren't sure what OR actually meant. And I had gone to sterile processing school, and there was just so much hands-on that I was learning in the first 6 months. I was a terrible tech. Were you a terrible tech when you first started? I had no natural knack for any of the stuff that we needed to be able to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember training on steam sterilization and just pining for the day when I could get through a whole shift without making some kind of scanning or stickering or documenting mistake. It was every day. So yeah, I feel that in my bones.
Bobby, the viewers and the listeners, we need to know, how many autoclave sticker guns did you melt?
Oh, man, I don't know that I ever ended up melting one of those. I saw one get melted. I did see, not that I'd recommend doing this, though, the low temp indicators getting put in a steam sterilizer, and they do the shrinky dink thing. And it was adorable for sure.
Oh, yeah, that's quite the experience. Yeah, I only melted a couple of guns. I'll say a couple because frankly, I can't remember how many, and I'm hoping it's just because there wasn't that many to remember. So I think what's interesting when we start to figure out how to incorporate certification into our own professional paths, it's that when you're studying by yourself or you're already in the field, or maybe you're going to a sterile processing program, what you're learning and how you're applying it is so different. And it's not that it's because they're from different schools of thought. It's just when you're studying on your own or in a class, you have that different understanding of why. You're learning the why aspects, and you're trying to build that comprehension for how a steam sterilizer actually sterilizes the items. Versus at work, you're just saying, okay, I have to load this a certain way so they can sterilize the item. Do you think that disconnect might be why people have a hard time incorporating certification into their professional path, or why it might be hard?
Yeah, certainly could be. You know, I mentioned that initially I was just, driving at getting these letters behind my name to get a pay increase. But I really do think that certification is valuable in the workplace. I think that's why hospitals who aren't in a state who are requiring certification ought to consider requiring it of their technicians, just to get that baseline knowledge, because it's not about, what button do we push on this machine, but it's why do we push that button? How is that machine configured? And when you don't have all those whys behind it, you lose all of the troubleshooting skills and critical thinking skills that are necessary to solve important problems and make sure that we don't have creeping in some practices that aren't appropriate for safety for our patients, things like that. So certainly, I think our technicians getting started maybe just have a really practical view of, I need to learn what button to push. And I think the more we can do to inspire our peers of the value of that certification, maybe the more interested they would be in taking off with it.
Right. And then so we understand that certification serves a purpose, that why really builds out that whole patient safety story that I think everybody kind of overlooks, where it's like, yes, you may be good at what you're doing, but I want you to understand why you're doing it and why what you're doing is important. So how do we help them through confidence certification to choose studying when they have competing priorities like child soccer practice, or maybe they get the opportunity to pick up an extra shift instead of going home and studying? Or like, how do we as Beyond Clean confidence certification help people to understand that it's a balancing act, not necessarily choosing one or the other?
That's right. And there's a lot that we can talk about how to fit certification into life and fit it into work. I've definitely got some thoughts about how those two things should dovetail into one another and have that maybe happen at the same time, have our certification studying be a part of our work. I know we want to talk about some more of that later on, but really it comes down to finding what's the natural rhythm of your life where this makes sense, so that you're not having to choose between your personal self and your professional self. Because whenever you start losing that work-life balance, that's when burnout comes in real quick.
Oh, I love that. And we're going to hold on to that as we move into this episode's break. We'll be right back, everyone. It's time for our mid-episode confidence boost, where we focus on a key sterile processing test concept. Now, there's no guarantee these concepts will be on the test that you take, but they are key concepts to the workplace and discussed in the literature. Today, we'll be covering peel pack basics. Now, peel packs are a type of sterility barrier, i.e. a device used to achieve and maintain sterility during reprocessing practices and sterilization with appropriate maintenance. Peel packs are made for lightweight, low-profile instrumentation. We also like to call them peel pouches or paper plastic pouches, and they can have a type 1 or a type 4 indicator on the outside of the pouch, but should be used with a type 5 integrator inside of them to demonstrate that all key sterility parameters have been met. It's important to remember that you don't write on the paper side of the pouch, as this is where the steam or your chemical sterilant penetrates to reach the item inside. Please remember to adhere to your IFUs when sterilizing and position your pouches paper to plastic when you're putting them into the sterilizer of choice, whether it's chemical or steam. The main reason why we put them paper to plastic is so that steam or your chemical of choice can penetrate effectively. If they're stacked all on top of each other, if two paper sides are touching, your chemical sterilant can't penetrate the way that it needs to, or the way that it was intended to during its sterilization testing. Okay, so just because you put it into a sterilizer, if we're not using it or preparing it effectively, it still won't achieve sterility. All right, that's a big one. They come in different types of varieties. There are some self-sealing ones, which have a removable tab that expose some adhesive that you fold up, or they may require a device to heat seal the pouch closed. Regardless of the type that you're using, this seal has to be flush, flat, no creases, no air bubbles, and definitely nothing stuck inside of it. These different components can really affect the sterility and the ability of the peel pouch to maintain the sterility of the item inside. The instruments need to be placed in an open and unlocked position to allow for your sterilant contact, and 1 to 1.5 inch space around the instrument is recommended as to not compromise the integrity of a pouch. So if you're shoving an instrument inside of a peel pouch, you may notice that you're actually lifting the edges, and now you don't have that good seal, and it's probably closed. Just get a bigger one, not a problem. Make sure you use tip protectors, because holes, like in any other type of sterility barrier, are our biggest enemy. That's going to be this week's mid-episode confidence boost, and don't forget to pass that test with confidence. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Confidence Certification. If you are just joining us, hello. Don't forget we're hanging out with Work BFF Bobby Parker today, and we are discussing where certification fits in our sterile processing journey. Not just, where does it fit in for us in our professional development, but literally, how do we make the 24 hours in a day? Because don't forget, you have to sleep in those 24 hours of the day. Where do we even start to squeeze studying in against all of our competing priorities and whatnot? And Bobby and I spent a little bit of the first half of the show talking about why certification is important and why we face some of those struggles inside of the work dynamic. And Bobby, you actually started talking about burnout and balancing between personal and professional, and maybe how you don't have to have personal and professional. You could have personal with professional. And I love that, because I think that really resonates with the extrinsic and the extrinsic purposes on why people study. What is intrinsically motivating you and what is extrinsically propelling you to do what you need to do.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. You mentioned intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. My story was primarily extrinsic. Like I mentioned, there was a pay increase at that hospital, and so I full on went for it. The full burnout cement mixer style of studying. When I say cement mixer, I mean that, pour it all in, churn it around for a little while, and then dump it all onto the exam so that I could say, please pay me, right? I wouldn't recommend that as a model to be repeated because, gosh, I don't know how much of that I retained long term to just cram as much as I can and dump it onto exam. I don't know how much that proved that I was a better technician than I otherwise would have been, but I was very motivated to get it done quickly.
Yeah. And, I started with big extrinsic motivation, like the whole health insurance thing. And then I was working with a neurologist and something just didn't seem right about how we were flashing a rongeur. So I felt, very intrinsically motivated, but I think the big point in that is that you're allowed to change, right? Like you wouldn't recommend studying or doing your applications the same way you did the first time. I have health insurance. We both have health insurance now and we're still here. So that obviously can't be the reason why we stayed because we achieved those motivators or those purposes, right? So I think a lot of it had to do with getting certified, achieving certification. And I only had one certification for a prolonged period of time. And I rode that out for as long as I could until I started to feel that paper ceiling, dare I say, where I couldn't pursue where I wanted to go because I didn't have the additional certification necessary to demonstrate that I could do what I could do, So extrinsic and intrinsic motivators and purposes, they're allowed to evolve and not getting stuck, just like our studying habits, right?
That's right. And I had much the same story. But you know what? After taking some of those additional certifications, I feel like, particularly for the instrument certification, that was perhaps more impactful on my day-to-day in the sterile processing department than even some of my tech certifications. So definitely worth it. But I had a similar story about how I came to those other certifications.
So speaking of your story, let's talk about your big Bobby influence plan here, and I've fortunately been privy to some of the amazing insight you have as a leader. I've never had that opportunity to work with you as my direct leader, but Bobby Parker as a leader, everybody, is very exciting. And he's actually has really robust ideas about incorporating certification and training into the department. So you don't necessarily have to compete with the personal and professional. Bobby, can you spill the beans a little bit on that? Because it's just so good.
Sure. So we were very blessed to be a part of a department that had the margins and the administrative support to build some sterile processing certification training into precepting. So when we would bring on a new employee, we so much wanted them to be prepared to take their exam after the completion of their orientation that we would build in maybe an hour or two of their training day to sit down with a certification book and go through and read some of that certification material that would match up with whatever area of the department they were being trained on for the day. And there's a ton of benefits to that. Obviously, a really big investment on our end, just as a leadership team, both from a labor perspective and also from the perspective of maybe the other technicians who see that and grumble about, man, 15 years ago, I didn't get to sit down and read my certification book and get paid to do it. But it was so valuable because we're bringing in these new technicians who are making, entry level pay in the hospital. We're asking them to choose certification study over their kids' soccer game. And the result that we kept getting out of that was last minute cramming for certifications. And sometimes that wasn't succeeding. And we just took the stance, let's partner with these technicians to try to incorporate some of this learning into their precepting. And not only do we have better success with getting people certified, but I feel like we had some good things come out of that in the department, and we had technicians who are more prepared to be able to face the challenges that we run into every day. And so I'm a big advocate for that kind of training.
I think that's so awesome because I know a lot of the times when I recommend not necessarily managing your time, because I think the ability to manage your time is a myth and like maybe a hoax. It's just your ability to prioritize and really heighten the things that you need to achieve effectively. And it's not my place to say what you should or shouldn't prioritize. And a lot of the suggestions I make are, well, maybe you need to do a lunch group study review. who wants to study during their lunch break at work? Well, the answer is nobody. But sometimes, you have to, especially when you're trying to make sure you have time for those personal aspects when your facility or your current structures aren't partnering with you. So I love that whole partner dynamic. That's so cool. And coming from a state that requires certification, I almost wish I had that in my previous experiences, because I think I would have been significantly less stressed, because with prioritizing comes anxiety. I feel like they go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I recognize that we're talking to an audience that's probably not experiencing that as the norm. And so as we're talking about how does certification studying fit in, you may roll your eyes at that, but I wanted to at least pitch it as something that is worth maybe suggesting to an educator or to a manager. If not for you personally, maybe for the next guy, for the next new hire, let's try it. Let's see if our 90 days that we spend with him training, that we carve out a couple of those hours for reading time and see if we don't actually get a better result for spending fewer hours hands on the instruments. It's worth asking. But personally for you, like Sarah said, find some ways to incorporate that into your work. Find a peer who will do it with you. Go to a leader and ask them for their advice and get some mentoring. Find some way to incorporate that alongside of work. Maybe not studying while you should be working, though. I wouldn't recommend doing that. I've seen so many people doing the podcast in the ear while putting the set together. Mm-hmm. I'm too scatterbrained to make that work, Sarah. I'd end up making a mistake.
No, I 100%. There is absolutely no way you'd be able to tell if I had a YouTube video playing in the background, because that set would be missing like 20 instruments. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if you're not already working in the field, don't wait to start applying for a job before you get your certification, because as Bobby's pointing out, there may be opportunities for you to enhance and maybe even solidify some of your core understandings that you learned in your self-study. So don't let your certification stop you in your professional progression as well, because it could be a really big part of it, and everybody's story is different, just like how we all find sterile processing. So as we begin to wrap today's episode, here's your homework. I know you guys thought I was just going to do it that one episode, but with the Confidence Certification Podcast, you leave with a little assignment. So for this week's homework, take a look at your schedule and try to forecast when the best times to study may be for you. If you're already in the field, we use the term forecasting to try and figure out what instrument sets we'll need, or just how late we can wait for the loaners before we call our vendor partners wondering where they are. But if you're not in the sterile processing field, it's just taking a look at your day-to-day routines and figuring out where you might be able to maximize your attention span to dedicate to studying. A lot of the times planning where you're going to study and when you're going to study and committing to that shows that big success in that turnaround. It's kind of like making a lunch date and you can't back out of it. I don't know, Bobby, have you ever done that? You made plans and then you realize you can't back out.
That's right. Sometimes we just need that commitment, that deadline.
Right. So that'll be your homework, and we'll see what time and how that looks for you when we meet up again next week. And that's going to do it for this week's episode. For more sterile processing education and resources, make sure to visit beyondclean.net or follow Beyond Clean on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out over 1,000 SPD-related videos at youtube.com/beyondclean. If you have any questions or comments for the show, you can reach out to info@beyondclean.net. Finally, make sure to download the Beyond Clean mobile app on Apple and Android app stores so that you don't miss a future episode of any of the other awesome Beyond Clean podcasts. My name is Sarah B. Cruz, and you've been listening to Confidence Certification. Until next time, keep fighting dirty and pass that test with confidence.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast series are of Sarah B. Cruz only and do not represent the companies she works for or collaborates with.